Hi everybody, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga. And today I want to do a brief review of a format I've developed to look at each posture and understand it both from an alignment perspective and an anatomy perspective. And the reason I'm focusing on this is because out of all the questions I possibly get when I go out and do trainings with yoga teachers, when I support my online students in my online learning program, by far the biggest questions I get have to do with cues. And the interesting thing is, underneath the question really are a whole bunch of questions about anatomy. But the question is always framed from the perspective of what's the right cue, or how can I cue? And I totally get this, and I think that the reason this is so telling is because it really illustrates that the cues that we use as teachers really are the way that we communicate with our students, not only what to do or our suggestions for what to do, but they allow us to communicate critical information about anatomy. And even for teachers out there who feel like, I don't really focus on anatomy all that much, the reality is, if you're teaching yoga, you are basically teaching human movement. And to effectively communicate movement, we need to understand anatomy. And that holds for teachers who might focus on restorative poses or different styles that are more restorative, like yin yoga. It holds for teachers who might focus on chakras or energy healing or bring meditation into their classes. I mean, it really doesn't matter what we're focusing on at a global level. The reality is we're teaching movement. And so in order to effectively communicate movement, we have to know how to clearly say it, what to do. And in order to do that, we need to be informed. And I'll tell you the other really magical thing that happens. Once you are better informed about anatomy, your confidence in sharing cues will grow exponentially. And the clarity with which you share these cues, or the clarity that the cues have, will also grow exponentially. And as a result, your impact will grow. And how can you measure impact? Well, you can look at your students and see, are they doing what I want them to do more times than not? And that's a reflection of the fact that they're getting it, they're understanding what you're saying. The other thing that you can use to gauge is look at them as they're practicing. Do they look like they're engaged in what's happening, or do they look distracted? That's a great sign that your impact is growing, because it means they're really present and they're listening and they're participating. The other way that I always gauge, in part, the impact that I'm making as a teacher is the questions I get after class. I love when I get questions after class because it shows that during class, students were paying attention. And it's something I said that sparked a question in their mind, and they want to take the time after class to approach me and say, hey, when you said this, I felt this, or when you said this, I didn't get it, what did you mean, right? And so this is a great way to gauge your impact. It also brings up a really important piece, which is to say that you really should only use cues that you can explain if someone were to ask you a question after class. And I really harp on this not because I want to blame teachers or shame teachers or point fingers, but because it really is part of the yoga teaching tradition to, as a student teacher, hear what you're being told in training, absorb it, and apply it. However, what often is lacking in the presentation of that information is the why. And so what ends up happening is, as an industry, we create all these teachers that are out there, and they're just repeating what they were told to say, repeating what they were told to say. And then if someone comes up after class and says, how come we want the feet to be hip width in bridge? Or how come you had us put a block between our thighs in bridge? Or how come you said if you have lower back pain in up dog to bend the elbows a little bit? And you basically have to say, or all you have to offer in response to that question is, that's what I was taught, well, that doesn't share any kind of knowledge with the student. And it really is deferring your power as a teacher. And I don't mean power in power, but I mean your ability to be part of the learning process. And so, of course, when you're in training, you're going to ask a lot of questions. If you've already completed your training and you have a lot of questions, well, guess what? You need to take responsibility for your own continuing education and make really smart decisions about what you're going to invest in going forward to fill those learning gaps. And I'll tell you, that may not be as simple as just getting another training through the traditional system. You know, when I look at teachers who are just basically in this, kind of treadmill of, oh, well, I'll get my 200 hours, oh, well, I'll get my 300 hours, oh, well, I'll take another training, and they're still not seeing the results they want, and they're not having the deep understanding that I'm talking about, well, that to me says there's something missing. And this is the kind of teacher that I'm speaking to here, someone who's open to different ways of gaining information, gaining knowledge, rather than maybe what seems like the only path or the traditional path. Okay, so what I want to do, I'm actually preparing this to send out to a yoga teacher, and I'm going to use my latest anatomy manual as the template for what I'm going to go over today. And when I was starting up this video, or when I started the video, I mentioned a template for cues. And so in my manual, I break down all the major poses with a specific template that I developed. And so the template basically for every pose is this: the primary action of the pose. What's the point? Why are we doing this? This is a great place to start with your students, because you can bet that when they do poses, more times than not, they're probably wondering, what's the point of this? Or what is this person telling me to do? Like, what benefit am I getting out of this posture? The next thing is the key actions. These are action-based cues. You can literally take them right from my manual and use them in your teaching. Now, why would you want to use an action-based cue over maybe an anatomy-based cue? Well, you want to because it's a really clear way to communicate. So if you're teaching a class and you really want to keep people focused, rather than go into anatomy, just teach from action. It's also a great place to start if you're a newer teacher and or a teacher who is needing to learn more anatomy to effectively give anatomy-based cues. Just teach from action. You can have a great experience as a student, and you can teach a really powerful class as a teacher focusing on action. The next piece is key muscles in action. And this is an area where teachers can get hung up, because when I say key muscles in action, what I'm really talking about are what are the muscles in that pose that are concentrically contracting. And if you're not sure what that is, look back at one of my earlier videos I recently did where I talk about the different kinds of muscle contractions. So a lot of this section is what are the muscles doing something in this posture versus lengthening, although I do make some reference there to lengthening. So that's that. And then I talk about the key joints in action. So let's say if I was in a warrior one and I had my arm up in the air, I would be talking about shoulder flexion. Let's say I was doing a forward fold and I was bending over, I'd be talking about spinal flexion. Let's say I was in an up dog, I'd be talking about spinal extension, right? Let's say I was in a warrior two, I'd be talking about hip abduction. So all of these terms are explained in the manual. All of these descriptors are essentially about key joints in action. And then modifications, because we always want to be able to have stuff in our back pocket to offer people if they need it. And things to look for as a teacher. So what are some things that commonly show up? Why, when I teach forward fold, do so many people look like this instead of like this? What's happening in their bodies? Possibly, what can I offer instead? And then the last piece is speaking to mind, body, and spirit. Because let's face it, even if we're focusing, like I do, with anatomy as the key focus of our teaching, we can't forget, and we don't want to forget, that there is a whole other aspect to yoga practice which has to do with the mind-body connection. And we want to give students room to acknowledge that, to feel that, to tap into that themselves. So I'm just going to quickly go over, I'll just pick a pose, and I'll pick one that's a standing posture since I'm standing up. And I'll just go over just quickly some of the pieces of what I just reviewed with you. So, okay, so let's do this one. So eagle pose. So eagle pose is broken down here in the manual. You've got a picture of the posture. So you're probably familiar with eagle pose, right? It's a standing balance, and obviously that means I'm standing on one leg. I'm bringing my arms in towards the middle. I'm bringing my legs in towards the middle. So right out of the gate, one of the things you'll notice is that I talk about shoulder adduction and hip adduction. Now, because I'm hugging into the middle, that means that muscles are doing work are going to include things like the adductor complex on the inner thigh. Because I'm not lengthening those muscles, I'm contracting, concentrically contracting those muscles to create that action of hip adduction. Right? Now, the other thing that's a little tricky with this, and something that teachers often confuse, is when they look at the position of the shoulders, many times teachers will say, oh, the shoulders look like they're internally rotating. And so that would be turning the head of the humerus inward, like you're hunching. But in reality, if you think about it, if I was internally rotating, I would look more like this in the pose. Really what I'm trying to get is a little bit of shoulder opening or external rotation, even though my shoulders are in adduction, okay? And in order to get external rotation, I need to use muscles on the back of the body, teres minor and infraspinatus, which are two external rotators that prevent the hunching in. If I was using the hunching in or the internal rotators, I'd be using muscles on the front of the body, like the pec minor, the pec major, coracobrachialis, and subscapularis, which is part of the rotator cuff. And so those are some pieces of the anatomy, the joint actions. If you think about the main focus, right, that first piece that I have for every pose, the main primary action of the posture, you could say learning balance. You could say lengthening the spine, strengthening the legs. There's no real right answer to that question. I give you a place to start because, as you know, there's so many different things that happen in a pose. I think, though, it is possible for us for each posture to pick one main thing that is the primary action. And then as you have people in a posture like this, speaking to mind, body, and spirit, you can bring in lots of things like feel the strength in your standing leg, or open through your heart center, or set your gaze at one point and notice how focusing on one point relieves you of the need to be doing 3 things at once, or whatever it is, whatever your style of sharing is. It's important to find time to fit that in, at least, pepper it throughout your teaching, especially, like I said before, if you're someone like me who likes to focus on anatomy, you want to keep kind of a nice distribution between focusing on anatomy, giving people time to be in silence, giving people opportunities where you're kind of posing not really inquiry questions, but maybe little observations or statements that give them a chance to be introspective, and or even just tap into the somatic experience of the pose. So maybe saying things like, what are you feeling in this posture around leg strength? Or do you feel or do you notice strength in your standing leg? Something that is a little bit of a lead-in because you know the anatomy at work in the pose, but it's very different than saying you should be feeling blah, 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 blah. Right? We don't really want to say that because it's hard for us to know, even though kind of technically I can say, yes, the hips are in adduction here, and yes, that means I have to be using the adductor complex. So yes, those muscles need to be concentrically contracting. So yes, maybe the person should be feeling strength in their lower legs. The reality is there's so many people who are going to feel something different. So I always use somatic references as an invitation rather than a prescription. So rather than saying you should be feeling length in your spine, even just switching it a bit and saying, do you feel taller? Do you feel length in your spine? Do you feel more open through the front of the body? So these are all ways to reframe it a bit so that you're giving the practitioner control and you're giving them the inquiry question, which then becomes the invitation for them to turn inward. And as you probably remember from your initial studies of philosophy of yoga, that turning inward is part of the 8 limbs, pratyahara, right? So there it is, right? This is one of the reasons why it's so confounding to me when people say, when teachers say, I don't want to focus on anatomy because I feel like it disconnects you from the deeper pieces of yoga. And nothing could be further from the truth in my mind. Focusing on things we can feel, focusing on the structure of the body, focusing on grounding into our foundation, all those things that are born from yoga, those things are a perfect entry to going more inward. And as I said, going more inward, when you look at the 8 limbs, I mean, the 8 limbs are asana in part, and then pratyahara, and eventually samadhi, enlightenment, right? So it's through the movement that we reach eventually that higher state, and understanding movement demands an understanding of anatomy. So I'm going to end this video there. I want to tell you, today it is March 9th. March 9th. And for this week, I'm offering this manual at $94 instead of $119. And I'll include the link here on the video so you can take a look at it and grab this. This is a 200-page manual. It's been recently revised. And not only are you going to get all of the postures broken down, there's a whole bunch of other information included. And when you click the link to purchase it, you'll see a preview of the inside, just like if you were to buy something off of Amazon. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please leave comments. I'd love to hear from you. And one other thing, if you're not in my anatomy work group on Facebook, join that. It's really a great way to have anatomy lessons throughout the week. I go in there and I do videos just like this in there as well. I will say it's just for teachers. So if you're not a yoga teacher, I have a lot of free content out there that can benefit you. The group though is just for teachers. And all you have to do when you go on Facebook is put in the Bare Bones Yoga Anatomy Work Group, and you'll get the link to join the group. There are 4 questions to complete, so please answer those questions, and that gives me an idea of who you are and what you hope to gain by being part of the group. So thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Any questions you want to email me, the website is barebonesyoga.com. Namaste.